Okay.
Let's get started, Joan.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. It's Joan here just to welcome you all to our 3-day meeting. Delighted to see you all here and welcome you back. And I'm dearly hoping that our next meeting is actually going to be face-to-face in Croatia in February. So please make sure that you put the dates in your diary. So we're going to start this morning and welcome Amy Gibbs, who's the Chief Executive of Birthrights UK. And she's going to speak to us about her experience of being an activist. And the title of her talk is Human Rights in Childbirth. So Amy, thank you so much for your time. It's fantastic. And we're really looking forward to hearing from you if you're okay to start. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you, Joan. And hello to everybody. I know we've got people from all over many different countries here. I'm going to be talking about human rights in childbirth in general, but particularly in the UK context and what we've seen here over the pandemic and more generally. So as Joan says, I'm the Chief Executive of Birthrights. We're a UK charity that champions respectful care in pregnancy and childbirth by protecting human rights. And today I'm going to cover human rights legal principles. In brief, this is not a big 40 minutes of legal talk, but talk about the framework for human rights, how they apply in maternity care, the impact of COVID-19 on human rights in childbirth here in the UK, although I'm sure there'll be many common themes for other countries too. Also, the impact of structural discrimination. I'm going to specifically talk about disability, disadvantage and race, which is 3 areas where Birthrights has done research and lived experience work. And then I will end on a more positive note, thinking about some scenarios and how human rights can help and good practice from our perspective. So it's a real pleasure to be here with such an amazing group of people, a real honour, and thank you for having me. So the next slide. I just want to start the talk with this quote, if the slide comes up. Thank you, Stefan. So this quote is from January Harsher, who's an American author and advocate. And she says, "I do not care what kind of birth you have, a home birth, scheduled cesarean, epidural hospital birth, or if you birth alone in the woods next to baby deer. I care that you had options, that you were supported in your choices, and that you were respected." And this quote really sums up our philosophy at Birthrights. We don't judge anyone's choices. We want all women and birthing people to be able to make informed decisions about what's right for them and their babies, and to be given respectful care. And choice, dignity and respect are themes that we'll keep coming back to today. They're at the root of safe maternity care. So the next slide just gives a little bit of information about Birthrights. So very briefly, we're quite a young charity. We were founded in 2013. We're a small part-time team of 8 staff at the moment. And we have a board of trustees that supports our work, which includes healthcare professionals in the maternity system, as well as expert human rights lawyers and charity leaders and others, governance experts. So we're really fortunate to have that health and human rights expertise right at the heart of our organisation. And we do 3 things. We give advice and resources to individuals about their rights in childbirth, and we train healthcare professionals, and we try to influence system change through our policy research and campaigns. And on the advice service, just to give you a sense of the scale of what's happened around COVID and the impact on people's rights in the UK. So as I say, we're quite a small charity, and we used to help about 200 people individually a year. And then we'd have thousands more would access our online information about their rights in childbirth. When the pandemic hit the UK in earnest in March last year, our inquiries shot up by over 460%. compared to the previous March. And over the course of this past year, we've helped over 1,000 people. So massive volume increase for us in terms of responding to individual needs and concerns. And I'll talk about some of those concerns and rights issues that we've seen in the pandemic in a minute. Training healthcare professionals is really vital to us. We know that it's very challenging, particularly in the UK NHS at the moment, and I'm sure in many other health services. The pandemic has kind of piled on top of existing pressures, makes it very difficult for people to provide the respectful and safe care that they want to. So training and working in partnership with healthcare professionals is really important. Last year, we reached over 4,000 professionals in this way. And talks like this are absolutely core to us getting the message out there about human rights in childbirth and how they can be a really positive, practical tool for healthcare professionals as much as an advocacy tool for individuals. Next slide, please. So the first thing I wanted to just stress is that human rights always matter. And as I've mentioned, you know, we all know we're still living through the pandemic, which has been globally challenging in numerous ways. And in the UK, we've seen that those challenges really vividly in the NHS. But COVID doesn't trump all. Human rights do still matter. They're absolutely vital, particularly, you know, for today in a birth context. So the World Health Organization said right at the beginning of the pandemic that all women have the right to a safe and positive childbirth experience, whether or not they have a confirmed COVID-19 infection. And that's really important. You know, women with COVID and women without COVID still have the same basic human rights. And the rights that the World Health Organization highlights here are being treated with respect and dignity, having a companion of choice throughout pregnancy and birth and postnatally, clear communications from healthcare professionals, pain relief, and mobility and choice of position during labour and birth. And despite this, we have heard and we continue to hear of human rights not being respected in the UK, with the impact falling often hardest on those who are already disadvantaged. So women with previous experience of trauma or loss, baby loss, disabled people, Black and brown women, and so on. And I'll talk about some of those disadvantage and discrimination issues too. So the next slide. So at Birthrights, we talk about these 5 core human rights principles. And these are, if you take anything else away today, this would be one of the things. So dignity is the founding principle of human rights. It comes from the very initial founding of our international human rights system, and it's about basic humanity, treating each other as human beings, as we'd all like to be treated and respected. And in the birth context, it means that the woman or person giving birth isn't a vessel. They're not just a means to deliver a baby. Their lives and experiences matter too. And that can, you know, directly link to their experience of birth and whether it's traumatic experience or a positive experience. So basic humanity is the founding principle of all of this. And then out of that value come these other 4. So autonomy is about the individual giving birth being the decision maker. They can always say no, and informed consent for anything that happens during pregnancy and birth is paramount. Choice is about, has been interpreted by the courts specifically to be about location and circumstances of birth. So where, how, and with whom you give birth. Respectful care is about having very basic needs met and also services that prevent harm or suffering or unavoidable harm or suffering. And then finally, and really importantly, equality, which is about equity and access experiences and outcomes, and freedom from discrimination throughout pregnancy and childbirth. So I've got 2 more slides just to touch on the legal underpinning for all of this. So the next slide, please. So all of these rights are enshrined in, as you will probably know, the European Convention on Human Rights. And in the UK, that's been translated into our UK laws as the Human Rights Act 1998. And these laws guarantee those minimum standards of care and those values that I talked about in 2 specific ways in the UK. And it's important to remember that the Human Rights Act isn't just about courts and legal cases. Birthrights has taken a bit more legal action during the pandemic because we've been so concerned about the disproportionate decisions that have been made. But in general, as a charity, we use the Human Rights Act as a positive tool. As I mentioned earlier, we empower women and birthing people and families and partners and healthcare professionals who come to us for help to champion rights and to make sure that choice and consent is respected. And we also use it as a positive tool for healthcare professionals to help them weigh up difficult decisions, for example, which I'll come on to an example of that. So mainly, human rights framework isn't actually about courts and litigation. It's about these positive duties. So public bodies, which includes the NHS and any private care or charity care that's providing a public function in the UK, they have a legal duty to protect all of our human rights. And it also means that legislation has to be human rights compliant. And healthcare professionals in the UK have a specific legal duty to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights. And what that boils down to is avoiding interfering with someone's rights unless it's absolutely necessary and proportionate. We'll talk about some examples of what that means. Protecting rights is about taking proactive action, such as safeguarding, and fulfilling human rights is about public authorities taking steps to strengthen systems and prevent and identify potential human rights violations. So there's positive proactive duties here for all of us to bear in mind. And the next slide just gives a bit more detail about the specific human rights that are relevant in a maternity care context. So I'm going to spend a bit of time just giving some examples from which are either from our advice service or from the research work we've done, which show how these rights can be in jeopardy sometimes in maternity care. So Article 2 is the right to life, and that very explicitly means that everyone who's pregnant has the right to access basic life-saving maternity care. So a couple of examples which are relevant in the UK and which we've seen through our work and other charities where this right is not being upheld or maybe in jeopardy are, so in the UK we have NHS charging for overseas visitors, which can affect some migrant women. And there's been a lot of work to show that that charging policy can discourage women from accessing care, even if they are in, very far along in their pregnancy or in a lot of distress or pain. And so there's a real risk there potentially to their safety. That policy and the impact of that in terms of impact on people accessing care, making people feel fearful of accessing care because they can't afford to pay for it, that can risk the safety, the life of them or their baby. Similarly, something that's come up in our research is a failure to provide postnatal care to women who maybe have had their babies removed into care by social services. If the right postnatal care, including mental health support, isn't in place for that woman, that can lead to a risk to their life too. So the Article 2 right to life is really relevant in maternity care. Article 3 is the right basically to receive maternity care that prevents avoidable suffering. So that would include having access to pain relief, including a birth pool where it's used in that way. On the postnatal ward, Article 3 protects your right to have your basic needs met. And really, we've heard some really awful stories during COVID of where basic needs for water, for food, for washing facilities haven't been met, either because of staffing shortages or because of visiting policies, which mean their partner can't be there to support them. So this is a really live issue at the moment. A failure to secure consent if then a medical procedure causes harm could also call into question this right not to be subjected to inhuman or degrading treatment. Article 8 is probably the most common right that we talk about because the right to a private and family life has been explicitly interpreted by the European courts to mean that people have the right to choose their circumstances and their location of birth. So place of birth, mode of birth, and companion. And it also protects bodily integrity and autonomy. In the UK, that's led to policy where trusts are supposed to provide access to 4 places of birth: home birth, midwifery-led units, which can be alongside or standalone from obstetric units, and then obviously hospital obstetric unit is the 4th one. And this right has been something we've had to champion time and again in the pandemic, particularly in relation to visiting restrictions, which have meant that birth partners have often been prevented from attending appointments throughout pregnancy, from attending scans, from even being there at the birth itself. And there is, there's a really clear right in law to be together as a family throughout pregnancy, birth, and postnatally. And I'll come on to talk a little bit more about that. Other examples of where Article 8 comes into play would be if a healthcare professional or a trust doesn't provide enough objective information and unbiased information for a woman to make an informed choice, which could include not providing interpreting services for people who don't speak the main language of the NHS, of the health service. And I think the important point to make about Article 8 is the first 2 rights I talked about, the right to life, and Article 3, the right not to be subjected to inhuman treatment. They're absolute rights. No one can or should interfere with those. But Article 8 is a qualified right, which means that healthcare trusts and bodies are permitted legally to interfere with it. So they might decide it's proportionate to change or stop services. And we've seen that a lot through the pandemic. I'll give some examples in a moment. But the decision to do that has to be proportionate and necessary. It has to weigh up, for example, COVID infection control, the need for that, against the real harm to women and families that may be caused through a visiting policy, a visiting restriction policy. And there have to be proper risk assessments and regular reviews of those decisions. You can't just decide at the beginning of the pandemic there won't be a home birth service and then leave it for several months. That's not human rights compliant. And even if a policy is lawful, so to suspend a service or to prevent visitors entering the hospital, for example, there still need to be exceptions on a case-by-case basis due to Article 14 in relation to non-discrimination, and also because of the Equality Act in the UK, which means public bodies have to give reasonable adjustments for people with specific physical and mental health needs. And so the final 2 articles I'll just touch on are Article 9, which protects respect for religious and other personal beliefs in the provision of care and choices. Again, that can be limited. So, for example, if a Muslim woman requested a female doctor to perform a vaginal exam, her request is protected by Article 9 and it should be respected as far as possible. But if the hospital can justify limiting that right, so for example, if they have an all-male team and there's no way they can find a female doctor, then it would be legitimate and proportionate to not respect that right on that occasion. And then Article 14 is about non-discrimination, and it prohibits discrimination across disability, sex and gender, race, religion, language, immigration status and national origin, and all of the rights and freedoms that are set out in the European Convention must be protected and applied without discrimination. So no matter who you are, whatever your background, whatever your protected characteristics, you need equal enjoyment and protection of all of those human rights. Okay, that's the legal bit done with. And I'm now going to talk about how this is sort of played out in the UK, particularly in the pandemic. So the next slide covers some real examples of human rights breaches during the pandemic. And I think I just want to acknowledge again that we recognise at Birthrights how difficult the situation is, and that, actually at the moment in the UK, although the vaccination rollout has been going well, we're in a situation again now where there's very high case levels, where there are staff shortages as a result of that, linked to self-isolation rules. And that means some trusts have had to bring restrictions back in. And as I said, we have trustees on our board that are healthcare professionals. We work closely with healthcare professionals day to day in our work in many ways, including our training team. So we hear that frontline intelligence all the time about how dire it really is on the front line, and we don't underestimate that. So this is about understanding where the kind of disproportionate decision making is happening, and supporting healthcare professionals as well that want to provide much more rights respecting care, and often raise concerns with us about decisions that are being made in their trusts. So a few examples here. It's been clear from the beginning of the pandemic in the World Health Organization guidance that I mentioned, and also in the NHS guidance, that no one should give birth alone, that visiting restriction policies might be appropriate in antenatal care or postnatal care, but no one should be giving birth without a partner of their choice. And sadly, that has happened in some cases. So we've supported couples where they needed to have an emergency C-section or just a very quickly planned one, and the partner was sent home because the woman tested positive, even if the partner tested negative. And there was some examples for a while, a couple of months, where hospital policies were wrongly interpreting the government rules about self-isolation and saying that partners couldn't leave home when actually accompanying a person giving birth would be a reasonable excuse to leave home, even if you were in a self-isolating household. And so this is a real example of, very distressing situation where we've got a number of women we're working with who have experienced deep trauma as a result of giving birth alone. Giving birth with a mask on, again, the guidance has always been clear, and we secured clarity around that from the Royal College of Midwives in the UK, that no one should be labouring with a mask on or giving birth with a mask on. But in May this year, another charity called Pregnant Then Screwed found 1 in 5 pregnant women were forced to wear a mask during labour, and that led to difficulty breathing, to panic attacks, to being sick. 50% of those having a C-section wore a mask. And as I say, this was contrary to the guidance that's been out there. So practice on the ground has not always kept up with the guidance around how to protect rights in a pandemic. And I've mentioned already that there's been some examples of women left alone on postnatal wards, and we've particularly been concerned about that, where women have had maybe serious mental health issues that predate their pregnancy, where they've had twin births or operative births, and they still weren't given exceptions to have a partner with them. And there's a trust in Wales at the moment that we're in dialogue with, because they've gone back to having no visiting at all on the antenatal or postnatal wards, and no partners at outpatient appointments or non-routine scans, which is really challenging for women and their partners. If you think about attending scans alone, for many people, they've said they understand the pressures, the NHS is absolutely fine, but for some, it can be deeply distressing and traumatic. For example, if people have had previous baby losses, or when they are there and then do receive bad news about their baby. And so there are some other examples on the slide, and I just want to pick up the home birth issue, because this is a really live issue in the UK at the moment, because of the staffing shortages that pre-existed the pandemic, but which have been really made a lot worse by the impacts of COVID-19 on the NHS and on the workforce in terms of their own health and well-being. That has led to some trusts suspending home births indefinitely, and that can't be proportionate, because, as I said earlier, any decisions to limit rights have to be kept under regular review. So we've got a couple of trusts where we're trying to work with them to improve the situation and bring home birth services back when they can. And as I said, we know at Birthrights this is unprecedented time for the NHS, for other health services around the world. It's particularly tough because there's a combination at the moment of the high cases, the staffing shortages, and I don't know about other places, but in the UK, we still have low levels of vaccination among pregnant women and birthing people. So there are real risks there around the COVID impact on pregnant women and birthing people. So we totally understand the need to manage COVID infection within hospitals in particular. But that doesn't mean that blanket decisions should be made, or decisions made that will last for many months, or that decisions can be made without any assessment of the risk to people's human rights and the risk of harm and trauma to families and to the people giving birth. So if on the next slide, this just gives you a flavour of one of the tools we've created, which is free for any maternity service leaders or managers to help think through decisions which are rights respecting, even in a pandemic. So I won't go through it in detail, and it's on the website, but this works through how to weigh up the risks and identify the most proportionate option that has the least impact on rights. And so I hope that might be something helpful for people to look at. And it's really, you know, it sets out that we understand there are risks you need to bear in mind around COVID, but that doesn't mean you don't also bear in mind the risks around trauma and harm to individuals. So I'm going to move on from COVID and talk about some of our research on structural discrimination in the UK. And this will cover three areas: disability, multiple disadvantage, and racial injustice, which we're focusing on at the moment. So the next slide, please, structural discrimination. And then slide 11 should be about disability. There we go. And then the next one. Thank you. So we did some research in 2018 with the University of Bournemouth, looking specifically at the experiences of disabled women. And this quote summarises some of the themes from that research around the specific issues for the specific human rights issues for disabled women. And the themes were not getting enough information about their choices and feeling they had less choice and control, feeling unhappier with the availability of pain relief, feeling like their rights were not respected and their disability was poorly understood. And one of the worrying things was that only 19% of people described having the reasonable adjustments that they were legally entitled to receive. And that's what I talked about earlier, that in the Equality Act in the UK, public bodies should make adjustments that are reasonable and proportionate to support people with physical or mental health disabilities or conditions. And one of the other key issues that came through that research was about a lack of continuity of care. And where there was continuity of care, the experiences were much more positive, because trust and understanding of the woman's disability and of their needs and their preferences and their choices could be built up and sustained throughout the relationship and carried through into the birth. And I think this quote really demonstrates that the importance of providing care and advice in the context of someone's disability, the need for individualised and personalised care, to listen to women and to understand that the woman is the expert on her own disability and will know what is best for her body. Next slide, please. So we also did some research with Birth Companions, another UK charity, in 2019, which looked at multiple disadvantage. And this slide just describes some of the factors of disadvantage that these women face. So all of the women we interviewed faced at least 3 of these. So there were issues with housing, being a single parent, being isolated, not having a job or having a very unstable job, mental and physical health concerns. Some of them were asylum seekers. They'd been trafficked or sexually exploited and brought that trauma with them into their pregnancy and birth, not having enough money to meet everyday needs. And some of the themes in this research were similar to disability in terms of not having choice and consent, but and also the need for continuity of carer and for specialist midwives. There was a huge amount of positive feedback from women and from professionals about the role of continuity of carer models and of specialist care, and how that really supports person-centered, rights-respecting, trauma-informed care for these very disadvantaged people. But there were specific findings as well about how trauma, historic or current trauma, both birth trauma and trauma in other parts of their lives, affected their pregnancy and birth experiences, how asylum and immigration impacted on women. One really traumatic story that always sticks with me was a woman who had recently arrived and had been recently moved again. When she was very close to giving birth, she was moved to another temporary accommodation just before she was due to give birth. And when she went into labour, she had an older child too. She was on her own, and the ambulance wouldn't take that older child with her to the hospital. So she had to leave the child. She had a choice, you know, do I go in to hospital to give birth? Do I stay with my child? She had to ask neighbours that she didn't know very well to look after her child. Went through labour and birth deeply anxious about the welfare of her other older child, and afterwards social services were called because she'd left her child with that neighbour. Now that's probably quite an extreme example, but really awful to be in that position, an impossible choice for that woman to take, and you know, the system there failing her because she was moved very close to birth. Then the ambulance, you know, her needs just weren't respected by the different parts of the system she came into contact with. And that was a really big theme we heard, that there were particular challenges with navigating multiple services and women falling between the cracks. And here are just a couple of quotes, which are from healthcare professionals who talked, midwives that we interviewed for this research, who talked about that a lot of these women just don't have very high expectations of what the basic treatment and care they should receive is, and so didn't know to challenge it, didn't know that they could say no or be offered choices, and sometimes faced increased scrutiny for, say, declining a test or a screening. And they were also less likely to complain in the healthcare professionals' view compared to other women. And as I mentioned, the second quote sort of touches on that point about these very vulnerable women that need a lot of support falling between the cracks. And a real positive that we found from this research was midwives who just went way above and beyond their functional role to be essentially like a navigator for these women. So while they had them in the period of maternity care, they would be trying to help sort out their housing, trying to get them the basic sort of, you know, a cot and clothes for their child, help them with their basics that they needed to get that child off to a good start, help them with benefits, all of the social things that we need around pregnancy and birth. There were midwives championing that and acting way beyond their role in a really positive way. But then, you know, the additional pressure that puts on midwives who aren't paid for that extra work and who are already in an overstretched service and facing burnout and trauma is taking a really big toll. And so the final theme on structural disadvantage I just wanted to touch on was racial injustice, which is the next slide. So in the UK, the statistics on this slide, when it comes up, are now really well known, but the findings are really stark. So you might know these two. Black women are 4 times more likely to die in pregnancy and childbirth. Mixed ethnicity women 3 times more likely. Asian women twice as likely. And the stillbirth rates and neonatal death rates are also higher for Black and Asian families. And there's this, for us as Birthrights, this is a real threat to the right to life, as we talked about earlier, and to everyone, regardless of their background and their ethnicity, receiving safe and respectful care. So for us, there was a real imperative to act on this issue. And there are many amazing activists and healthcare organisations, including the Royal Colleges here in the UK, that have now picked this up and are really driving forward action and understanding. So we set up an inquiry to look into this issue from a human rights perspective. And the reason we did was that there's lots of research, sorry, it's the next slide. There's lots of research on and evidence out there about racial inequities in outcomes, as I've described. You know, we know that Black and brown women are more likely to die and that their babies are more at risk, and they're also more at risk of serious illnesses in pregnancy. And a large survey in 2010 here in the UK also found evidence of less choice, less access to pain relief, higher C-section rates, and so on. So some of the common rights issues. And so we wanted to understand whether their experiences of maternity care are also worse, and what other rights might be being undermined. And particularly to look at what concrete action is needed to change this. So to do this work, the next slide, please, we set up an expert panel of people with lived experience, with maternity care expertise. So again, healthcare professional voices really at the forefront. So we have 2 midwives and 2 obstetricians amongst this group. Health and human rights lawyers. It's chaired by a QC, a leading human rights barrister, and anti-racism experts too. And we are focused on understanding the stories behind these statistics that often get put out. And we've had over 300 people share really detailed experiences with us, some really difficult to read and hear. And we've also had some evidence sessions with stakeholders. So we've heard from the Nursing and Midwifery Council, who are the regulator here in the UK, the Royal College of Midwives, the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, NICE, who set the clinical guidelines, and Embrace UK, who do the research that I cited earlier about maternal and infant deaths. So those amazing people are leading this work, supported by Birthrights. And we we've got our final evidence session tomorrow with NICE and Embrace UK, and then we'll be starting to analyse the findings and coming out with our report early in the new year. But I can share a couple of the themes that have been coming out from the call for evidence so far. And these, what's really interesting in the work is that the issues highlighted by women are and birthing people are also highlighted by midwives, who we've heard from too. So some of the key things that have come out really strongly are about feeling unsafe, being dismissed and disbelieved, and having concerns about either themselves or their baby ignored. Pervasive microaggressions and stereotypes which can lead to harm or distress. Disrespect, not asking about religious or cultural needs, so not caring in a person-centered way. And a really worrying finding, but hopefully something where there can be some concrete action, is around a failure to recognise some serious risks or conditions because of skin colour. So we've heard from Black women where their babies had jaundice and that just wasn't recognised despite them really fighting for it, and eventually it was picked up. And similarly, Asian women with sepsis, where that wasn't picked up until very late in the day because it didn't match the appearance of those conditions. And you know, many of the healthcare professionals on our panel have talked about how the white body is still the default in education, certainly here in the UK, and that impacts on how people pick up and escalate concerns. And then the last slide on the race issues is this quote from a midwife who we've been asking everyone in the inquiry, what would good look like, or did you experience good care? And there are some really powerful examples from women, and what they say there are quite a lot of women who, even when they had a harrowing or difficult experience, said that there was a caregiver who was amazing. And when you ask what that looks like, it was listening and being treated with respect and being treated kindly and being supported to understand their personal needs and their preferences and choices as far as possible. So this quote from the healthcare professional was really powerful to me, because from her perspective, good practice is listening to people, respecting their choices, always giving evidence behind recommendations, diversity in the workforce, proper training for staff, and escalation where there is problematic behaviour. I think this bit is so crucial, treating people like they're actually human, not just a skin colour or a name we haven't heard before, practicing someone's name and getting it right. asking people about their cultural practices. So these themes of listening, treating people with respect and personalised care, they are all the fundamental building blocks of basic rights respecting maternity care. And across the three areas of sort of structural discrimination that I've talked about, those themes are what can help. Those themes have come out time and again from both women and healthcare professionals as what matters and what makes care feel positive rather than traumatic in most cases. It's not always just that, but that's an important basis. So I'm just going to move on in the last sort of 5 minutes to talk about some scenarios and sort of try and bring to life how human rights principles can help navigate challenges in maternity care. And this is something we do in our longer training. We work through common scenarios in breakout sessions with healthcare professionals. And it's always the bit that people love about the training, you know, applying human rights in practical terms. So the first one is about home birth. And this is a common issue we hear about, and no doubt you do too. So woman who has planned a home birth, but she's 12 days overdue, she doesn't want an induction and she wants to give birth at home. And the relevant article in the Human Rights Act and the European Convention is the right to choose where you give birth and who's present under Article 8. And what's crucial here is that, you know, no one can be compelled to attend hospital. The risks and benefits of home birth versus induction or other options should be discussed fully with the woman in an objective way and an unbiased way. But if she still chooses a home birth, that choice should be respected and supported. That applies to high-risk women as well. And although there's not a legal guarantee of having a home birth service in your area, all the government guidance in the UK states that home birth should be available. But the exception to that, as I talked about earlier, is that this right can be restricted if there's a legitimate aim. So protecting the health of others, controlling COVID, for example, could be a legitimate aim. But trusts need to demonstrate that they've looked at other options for keeping a home birth service going, for example. So using independent midwives or retired midwives, looking at other options for transfer into hospital if an ambulance service is under pressure. But in this scenario, that woman should be supported in her choice. But if the service is suspended, then, you know, supporting her choice as close to it as possible. So I've seen home birth services at the moment that have been suspended where they're supporting those women who had a planned home birth to give birth in a standalone midwifery centre, so that it's as close to a home birth, as close to their original choice as possible. That's one example of how a trust is trying to still uphold rights if they can. It's worth just noting as well that there was a case with the NHS Ombudsman here in the UK where an NHS trust that didn't make contingency plans after it suspended its home birth was found to be acting unreasonably. So it is really important that that process of weighing up the risks and of thinking about all the other options and only shutting the service as a last resort is at the forefront of leaders' minds within maternity care. The next scenario is about caesarean. A maternal request caesarean is not at the moment because of COVID restrictions, but generally this is the main thing that people contact Birthrights about on the advice line. And this is an example where someone's 20 weeks and would like a C-section as it's normal in her culture, and she's offered counselling and refuses. And again, Article 8 is the important one here. The right to choose your birth circumstances includes type of birth. But as we've talked about, there is a qualified right. This is a qualified right, so there could be limits put on it, and it might be legally justifiable to decline a caesarean on the cost grounds or risk grounds to the NHS or to other people or to that woman. But that's unlikely to start that relationship in the pregnancy journey in a constructive way. And NICE guidance in the UK is really clear that hospitals should offer counselling, but if a woman still wants a C-section, it should be provided. And if that obstetrician doesn't want to provide it, which is their right to under their do no harm duties, the woman should be referred to an obstetrician who will provide it, or to a different hospital if the policies are different. And hospitals should be following NICE guidelines unless they can show a good reason for not doing. And we challenged Trust in Oxford around this over many years, and they eventually have changed their policy to allow maternal request cesareans after a lot of engagement. But the crucial thing here for this scenario is to have a respectful starting point for the conversation, understand that this is the woman's choice, and if it's still what she wants at the end, they'll find a way to support that, but to look at all the other options and to absolutely have that conversation about risk and the different alternatives. And so the final scenario is a bit more about that dialogue around consent. So this is induction, where a woman is concerned about her baby's movements. It's her second baby, but she has an ultrasound and the CTG is normal, but she's still told she should be induced or her baby could die. And the reason we include this scenario is that it really highlights consent and what meaningful informed consent really means. So as we've touched on in this, this woman, like everyone, has the right to say no to anything in birth, and you need her informed consent to proceed with induction. And there was a judgment in the UK called the Montgomery judgment in the Supreme Court, which made really clear that informed consent is about a two-way dialogue, which has to cover the risks and benefits of both the proposed option, so here induction, and reasonable alternatives. So it can't just be you should have an induction, that's the end of the conversation. There has to be a dialogue and a weighing up of those different options that shares information about risks and benefits, evidence-based, with that woman, so she can make an informed decision. And the risks should be material to that woman, not general or broad. Should be about the specific risks of the baby being harmed, not just a general statement such as your baby could die. And the other point to make is that undue influence or coercive language can mean that consent isn't valid, and that's a really important thing that we go into in our training more too. So my final point is just about what good looks like. And this has come from our work with women, with many healthcare professionals, and the research I've talked about. So the next slide, and then the next one, talks about what good looks like. And the themes are, as we've touched on throughout this, really good quality dialogue, which includes language support for people who may not speak the main language or may have learning or communication needs, respecting that a woman or birthing person can always say no, that the trust should start from yes, but that some rights can be limited, but there needs to be an explanation for why and a proper risk assessment around that. Meeting basic needs and privacy on the ward, and providing accessible environments for people, whether that's wheelchair accessible for people with disabilities, or accessible for people with particular religious needs. So there's some really great work in Bolton that we know about, where antenatal clinics are being provided in mosques to encourage access and uptake of that very early pregnancy support. And then, a theme throughout this has been personalised care, equity, making exceptions to blanket policies to meet individual people's needs, and that is what equity is, and it's really, really important. Continuity of carer and trauma-informed care are really core to what good looks like too. And the final point I wanted to leave you with is why this all matters, and the sort of impact of rights respecting care, which is evidence-based. So time and again, the evidence has shown that what matters most is how a woman or a birthing person is treated, the relationship they have with their caregivers, and feeling in control. So the specifics of birth matter less than whether they felt they could exercise choice and control. And this is really rights respecting care in a nutshell. This evidence from Cook and Loomis sets out here that, positive and negative recollections of their birth are more about how they felt and whether they felt they had choice and control, less about the specific details of their experience. And I think that's really powerful, because it means if someone wanted a home birth, but actually for for various reasons, they end up with an emergency cesarean, it doesn't mean that they can't have a positive birth. It doesn't mean that birth has to be traumatic. If they are given the opportunity to make informed consent, to feel in control about decisions about what happens next, they're treated kindly, they can have a positive experience even out of something that they didn't initially want in terms of their initial choices. So personalised care is safe care. And, you know, in the UK, the maternity scandals we've seen recently really show the cost of not listening to women and families. So if you take one message away, it would be human rights respecting care is personalised care. It's based on listening, supporting people to make informed decisions, and understanding people's specific needs. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. That was fantastic. I have about 3 pages of questions here.
Yeah, so, sorry, I know I covered an awful lot.
I don't think I should be the one to start, but just to say that I'm not sure about everyone else, but looking at the chat, it seems that much of what you've said is not limited to the UK by any stretch, and we're all dealing with the same issues, maybe in ever so slightly different ways. So I'm not sure if anyone would like to start or ask a question. I know there's been a lot going on in the chat. I think you've set everybody on fire now, looking to develop a new action on the humanization of birth. So I just to say thank you so much. That was fantastic. So has anyone any questions? You can put your mic on, or I'm certainly happy to start. Or if you want to put your hand up, I think Katharina, I'll try and keep an eye on the hands if that's okay. Katharina, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for that talk, Amy. I come from a parents organization in Germany called Motherhood. We're basically doing much of the work that you are doing, but we lack the human rights lawyer support. I know that Birthrights is special because Elizabeth was with you from the start, and she was, you know, kind of the kick up and everything, but where do you find the lawyers that take it on themselves to have the human rights background plus the medical knowledge? Where do we find them? I know you had them in the first place, so it was your starting point, but do you have any, you know, tips, anything?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, and you know, you're right, we're really fortunate that we were founded by a human rights barrister in the UK who also was a doula. I mean, she's just one of those amazing people that does all of these different things, but there are international networks. So I know that we've been involved with human rights in childbirth globally. So I don't know if they have links to lawyers in different countries. I'm really happy to take that question away and talk to, because I'm not a lawyer, I don't necessarily, things aren't springing to mind, but Elizabeth did a more international work initially when she founded Birthrights, because there's quite a lot of appetite for her to go and talk, probably for the reason you're saying. But let me talk to her and see if there are other networks that she can think of. Because I think that's a really good question. I mean, there's a lot of our information on our website. Obviously it's about UK law, but a lot of the basic rights information is from the European Convention, so should still be applicable. So that's all free. You know, if people want to use our material, we see it as very much sort of open source. Please use our material, just if you can cite us, that's great. But in terms of activist lawyers that you can work with in a positive way, I don't know, but I can try and find out. Sorry, that's probably not very helpful.
Anything is helpful. I'll take anything.
Okay. Yeah, Yvonne has also responded in the chat, Katharina, as well, which might be helpful, or maybe you guys can communicate offline. And there's another one here from Michelle. 2 lawyers got involved after birthing, having had lived experiences of abuses during childbirth. So there seems to be quite a connection there between personal experience and the let's say the activist piece that comes afterwards. Amy, one of the things I was wondering about, and I know sort of COVID is kind of the big thing in the room, but we've had an issue in Ireland, certainly, where partners and companions are being categorized as visitors, the same as any other visitor, and that has been a big problem. But you also mentioned vaccination rates in pregnant women, and certainly they're lower here than in the normal population. Our population is 90% vaccinated at this stage, and that's from 12 years of age and over. I think it's 87% now the 12-year-olds are in, but 90% for over 18. But we had a situation where one of the hospitals, you were talking about the reviewing of non-evidence-based practices and visitor restrictions, where one of the hospitals indicated that because of low vaccination rates in pregnant women, and we don't have robust data on it, that was one of the reasons why they were keeping the visitor restrictions up. And so I'm just wondering, are you having issues conflated in the UK, say vaccination rates, companions being treated as visitors, all sorts of things being put into the pot together to continue what certainly are not evidence-based and certainly are not, pro women and birthing people's rights within maternity care?
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it, Joan, that because COVID understandably is the biggest thing that most NHS services are, or equivalent, are grappling with. They are conflating lots of things and just saying, oh, it's COVID, so we'll go to the most restrictive solution. And the thing is, not all trusts are doing it. Some trusts have still got home birth services running. They still have partners allowed to all appointments and to obviously labour and birth and postnatally, going back towards more normal visiting hours. So it is possible to do it, even in the context of high case rates and low vaccination. I think the low vaccination rates has made the campaigning side of it a little more challenging for us because, obviously that does mean women are more at risk. Those women who are unvaccinated are more at risk. So there is a direct relationship there between, our goals as well. And we recognise there's almost like there's a particular perfect storm here in the UK of the high cases, really difficult staff shortages and the low vaccination rates, which mean the risks of infection are there, and we accept that, but they shouldn't be conflated. And our bottom line has always been that partners are not visitors. You shouldn't be treating a partner who's the father or parent of the baby too and has their own rights. Actually, they shouldn't be being treated as just a visitor. And we know of midwifery leaders who've tried as well to fight that kind of corner within their hospitals and have been told, no, it's a blanket rule, it has to be the same for everyone. And this is why I kept talking about equity, because there's a misunderstanding that equity and equality means everyone has to be treated the same. So all visitors in this scenario should be treated the same, when actually that's not equity. Equity is you treat some people differently because they need additional support or they have additional rights. So partners aren't visitors is our kind of base position. And the NHS England eventually did update their guidance to make that really clear, and that's been helpful for us in terms of lobbying trusts. But some trusts are just really digging their heels in and saying it's too difficult and the risks are too great because of COVID. And other trusts are being much more creative and flexible and trying to protect the right of a family to be together as much as possible. And even if they've maybe brought back slightly more restricted visiting hours, they've still tried to protect the sort of postnatal period, the immediate postnatal period, for example. But it sounds very similar what you're grappling with in Ireland to what we're grappling with.
And just a final thing, and I'll check if anyone else has questions. Are you planning, Amy, in Birthrights to do any work with women, say, who were 6 months, 9 months, a year after the birth experience during restrictions, to find out from their perspective what the impact has been, other than our record of the policy, if that makes any sense, but what it has actually meant? I'm just wondering, are you looking at doing anything like that? Because I'm sure there's lots of people who would like to do something similar.
So there has been some work done on that by a collaboration in the UK called RISK, which is WRISK. And they did some research looking at the impact of all of these restrictions and how they've impacted on, mental health and all other consequences, relationship with the child and so on. So that's been done to an extent, but obviously not a year after yet. And we have been thinking about what's our role within that, what should we be doing? I mean, one thing that we are seeing at the moment in our advice line is a real increase in people contacting us who want to make a complaint about their treatment because of COVID. So we've got an indication from that there are many more people who feel traumatized or just really cross, actually, some people, about how they were treated, and they are reasonable. They respect that it's COVID and it's unprecedented and it's difficult. I think there was, at the beginning of the pandemic, when no one knew what was happening and how COVID spread and so on, there was a bit more sympathy amongst the women we support for quite stringent restrictions, because no one knew what they were doing and we had to just protect, it's just a very sort of lockdown mentality, rightly. But now, like, lessons have been learned. Water births aren't dangerous. There's not evidence that there's transmission of COVID through water, for example, whereas at the beginning, some trusts were stopping water births because they didn't know if it was problematic. So it's, I think where we are in the pandemic now, trusts have been able to look at what others have done. And as I say, some are really upholding good practice and trying to protect rights as much as possible, so it can be done. But it's a good question, and it is something we'd like to do. I think, like many charities, we're just very small, so we have to try and prioritize our work or get more funding. But that's something that would be really powerful to know. I saw in the chat quite a lot of people talking about obstetric violence, and I just wanted to say that that's something we've done a bit of work on at Birthrights. We did a seminar with some lawyers about obstetric violence and what that really means, and many of the examples of that we hear of are unconsented vaginal exams and how traumatic that is for some women, particularly kind of survivors of sexual trauma or other issues. And we're hoping that we'll be able to get funding to work with an academic partner to baseline what obstetric violence is in the UK, like the level of it, and think about what a definition would be too, because it's the definition is quite contested, particularly in health professional circles. Some people don't like the term, and then all of that. So it's something we want to prioritize as an organization, is obstetric violence. So I just thought it might be useful for people to know.
Amy, that's fantastic, and there's lots of really buzzing things in the chat on your inspiring presentation, and fantastic, and thank you so much. Amy, I'm just wondering, do you have time for one last question? Myrto has a question. Yes. I apologize. I know I've had you online early and everything for technical.
Oh, that's all right.
Just if you have a minute for that, we'll just.
Yes. And then I'm going to get a coffee because it's only 9 a.m. here.
Yeah, exactly. So, Myrto, this will be the last question. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much too. I just wanted to ask about your research about disabled women, because I've started doing one. Not related to birth and the perinatal experiences, not to the COVID crisis. But I'd like to know if you have more information on the work. I could find that. I could use it as a bibliography as well. Or just open up new directions, because I do have a disability myself.
Okay, thank you for sharing. So, sorry, I saw another question come in the chat. So was the question about sharing our research. Do you want to read more about it?
Yes, if you have more research about, but more information about disabled women and human rights, because there's this sort of movement about disability and human rights being a human rights issue. So, maybe there are problems about human rights in our era generally. So, yes, if you have more research.
Yeah, so I'm going to put a link in the chat for you. And I talked about some of the headline findings, but there's some really powerful case studies in the reports, as well as findings that I touched on. So some of the other findings I didn't touch on were linked to, so we did a survey and we also did in-depth interviews. And in the survey, more than a quarter felt their rights were poorly respected. A quarter felt they were treated less favourably because of their disability. More than half felt that healthcare providers didn't have appropriate attitudes to disability, so suggestion of disability discrimination there, or stereotyping and bias. And I mentioned that only 19% thought reasonable adjustments have been made for them, and there was issues about inaccessible birth rooms and postnatal wards, notes and scans not being accessible, and so on. And then in the in-depth interviews, there was a lot about disabled people being experts in their own conditions and just not feeling listened to or respected about that. And it meant that, and that's a missed opportunity, because actually understanding the disabled person's perspective can help make sure the care is more appropriate and that there's a safer outcome. So I put the link in the chat so you can look at the reports.
Yes, great. Thank you very much. You're doing half my work now.
Oh, no problem. Please use it.
Thank you. I'll refer to you, obviously. Thanks very much.
No problem.
Amy, thank you so much, and thank you for your time this morning. It's been fantastic. And if you've any need to contact any of us, or there's any contacts that any of us might have or whatever, you have our email addresses now, so please do keep in touch. And again, just to say thank you so much for your generous time and for sharing that with us this morning. We really, really appreciate it. Can I just say to everyone else in the meeting, if you just